Hello, WordPress Buffalo folks and the internet, if you're out there. Hope you're out there. Sort of an experiment. We'll see what happens. I gave this talk developing a client-focused admin panel at WordCamp Toronto Developer Edition a couple weeks ago. I've added a little bit in a couple spots. The focus tonight will be a little bit different than Toronto, just because sort of my opinions have changed and people brought up some ideas in Toronto that I thought were good. This is sort of version 1.5 of the talk. Toronto is sort of beta version. The next version will probably, the title will change a little bit, and I think you might get a sense why. But mainly because a lot of what I'm going to talk about doesn't just apply to clients. It can apply to anyone who manages a site. I think, I know I work with clients, Andy, you deal with clients. I mean, even if, but even for both of us working with clients, these are things that we can do just for our own personal sites to make usability improvements and just make it a more pleasant working experience. So, also just for the record, the font that I have didn't load on this computer, so that's why it looks like this. Just gonna throw that out there. It's not my fault. All right, so developing a client-focused admin panel. What does this mean? What is a client-focused admin panel? That is using WordPress plugins and/or code to simplify, streamline, and focus the admin panel to the needs and capabilities of a specific, got cut off, a specific client or website. That's sort of my capsule definition of what this is. The basic idea being that we want to tailor WordPress to work for a specific need rather than tailoring our needs to WordPress. I think a lot of the time this is going to improve ease of use. It's going to make it easier to work with WordPress. It's going to reduce errors because you're removing stuff that you don't need to work with or that isn't set up right. It's going to limit client costs because you don't need to constantly send in the web designer to fix things that got broken. Obviously, this is less important if you're building your own website. And it's going to mean that you can edit with abandon. This is a big one for me. The ability to just go in and make changes and make edits and not really have to think about how something going to work. Is it going to break? Is it going to fall apart the minute that I touch this button? So that's sort of that. So yeah, making site changes without fear of screwing up the website. Big one. I kind of call this the Apple versus Microsoft ideals. The idea of manipulating the admin panel. I think out of the box, WordPress is a lot of ways like the Microsoft model. It lets you sort of do whatever you want, it lets you make whatever change you want to do, and it never really points you in a specific direction. Whereas the Apple model is sort of, we're going to tell you how to do a specific thing, or we're going to guide you in a specific direction to help you make a specific design or content choice in the way that we think is best. Though there are two different extremes. One end is sort of the WordPress default, which is install all the plugins you want and add themes and change all the code around it and sort of mess with it to your heart's content. And then there's the opposite, which would be locking things down and having only certain options available and really limiting what certain folks can do. I think it's best not to be at one end of the extreme or the other, but find a middle ground, find what's best for your specific needs. Because usually it's not a good idea to make everything totally easily editable, because usually clients aren't going to want to muck around in that code or aren't going to need to muck around in that code. It's going to introduce a lot of complications. And even for yourself, it can help you be faster and more efficient by sort of removing some of those options. On the other hand, though, it can kind of be bad to remove too many options because then it sort of limits your flexibility and it's going to make it a little bit harder to work outside the framework that you're dealing with. So I think of it, again, as kind of a spectrum. one on you have the other end, and you want to be somewhere in the middle. It'll probably be on closer to one side than the other, but that's a choice that you have to make. There's really no right answer here. This is sort of an interesting thing that I sort of thought up today, and we'll add into future editions of this. But in the past, when you were building a website, you were working either with like a coding framework, like Symfony for PHP, or Rails if you're a Ruby developer. Not only are you building what the viewer and the reader see, the front end of your site, but you also have to build the back end of the site. You have to build the admin panel, and you have to think of all those details. WordPress does a lot of that for us, so it's very easy to fall into the trap of sort of just going with the defaults that WordPress has set. I think it's very important, and what I'm going to show you is that you don't have to settle for the defaults. There are a lot of cool tricks you can do to reshape and refocus the WordPress admin panel so it's specific to your site. So it sounds cool. How do I get started? It's an excellent question. You can do this with plugins. You can do this yourself, writing up your own code. And then if you do write up your own code, you have two options really. You can do a plugin. You can write your own plugin as opposed to finding one on the plugin archive. Or you can go into your functions.php and start to muck around and add stuff in there. Again, this is another decision. This is another sort of thing, another kind of spectrum in a way. On one hand, you might want to put something in a plugin. You might want to put something else in a functions.php file. Ultimately, it comes down to a question of permanence. This idea that if you put something in a plugin, it's going to be persistent across themes. So if you put a particular bit of code into your plugin and change your theme, that bit of code is still going to be intact. If you put it in the functions.php file, it's only relevant when that specific theme is active. So you have to sort of decide as you look at these bits of code if you're going to go that route. How do you want that code to stay activated? Is that per theme, or is that in a site-wide sort of situation? You're probably not always going to want to have everything in a plugin. You're not always going to want to have everything in a functions.php file. I tend to mix and match. And I also use the must-use plugins. A must-use plugin is a plugin file that you drop in a specific folder, and it stays active. There's actually no way to deactivate that plugin unless you actually remove the file from the server or move it out of that must-use plugins folder. And that's a great way to keep something active and make sure that it doesn't get deactivated. But that can lead to the problem that the client doesn't really have the capability of deactivating it without going in FTP. So you want to really consider all of your options and sort of all of the different paths that you can take as you go forward. So what can you edit? What can I edit? Just about everything. Pretty much everything in the WordPress admin panel can actually be manipulated and tweaked and transformed in some way to make it more personal to your site and your needs. For example, you can tweak the login screen. You can actually style the login screen to match your specific website. Here's an example. This is the WordPress login page. I didn't touch HTML at all. This is strictly CSS. And pretty much only the layout of the elements is recognizable. Otherwise, everything else, you see there's a new background, there are new button styles, there's a new logo up there. I've moved this back button up to the top and done some styles on there. You have full CSS control over the login screen. You can actually embed a little chunk of code into your header and do all sorts of fun stuff there. This is a great way to make the login experience a little more personal to your site. You can change menus. So once you've logged in, you have your full list of menus. You can actually tweak those. So by default, we have posts, pages, media, links. That'll be disappearing soon. But you can change all of those and link to specific things and specific functions you want your clients or yourself to be able to access. Here's an example. This is a client site. This is a live site, screenshot actually, but of a live installation. You can see that it's been significantly pared down. There's only news, pages, and just a couple other options there. And actually, that news item, that's just posts. I've just renamed that because for the client, post doesn't necessarily make sense. What does that mean? Calling that news makes that a little bit easier. And for your specific site, you might call that blog. You might have other things you might want to call that. I've added a miscellaneous info tab. I won't go more into that, but that's just a single page that they can click into to edit certain aspects of the site. So this is just a very pared down and very simple menu, and you can do all sorts of tweaks like that. You might add your own item over here that links to a specific page, maybe this is a simple site that only has 4 pages. You could actually go up here and just add 4 sidebar items to the edit pages for those specific items. And they never actually have to see that page that lists all the pages and has the quick edit options. You can actually remove that from their WordPress experience entirely, which for a smaller site might be a good way to go to keep it simple. Admin menu editor. You can do all this in code, and I'm going to have examples online that will show you how to do that. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for everyone, especially if you don't like mucking around in code. The menu code in WordPress is very thorough and tends to get very frustrating very quickly. Admin menu editor is visual, it's drag and drop, create menus, it's super easy to use, and it totally transforms the experience of working with menus in WordPress, the dashboard menus in WordPress. It's free. There's also a $10 Pro version. I'm not sure what it adds. I've never used it, but I feel like I probably will pay for it eventually just to support the creator because I use it all the time. It's one of the few plugins I use to do this kind of stuff. So I highly recommend that. The dashboard. So the first thing you see when you log into WordPress is the dashboard screen. Not all that useful, right? It doesn't show you a lot of stuff. Like there are all these widgets like here's the latest WordPress news and here's the latest plugins that have been uploaded. It doesn't really mean a lot to me even, and I'm a WordPress developer, and it certainly doesn't mean anything to my clients. They don't care about the latest plugins. They don't care about, the 3.5 beta was just released. That doesn't matter to them. And that little box in the top left that shows you, this is how many posts you have, this is how many pages you have. Well, that's cool, but if you start adding custom content, custom post types and that sort of thing, then you're sort of missing out on a lot of those post types too, and that kind of information. So I think it's really useful and a nice way to spice up WordPress. Customize it. Do your own fun stuff to it. I have a screenshot. I don't have a screenshot. Maybe I do. Yes, I do. Removing widgets. You can actually strip widgets out. Those latest WordPress news, latest plugins. You can hide those entirely. So you can just remove them. And then you can add your own. It's really, really simple. It's 10 lines of code. And it's like literally copy and paste easy to add your own custom widget into the dashboard and have it pull in an RSS feed. So like all of my clients, or most of my clients, on their dashboards get an RSS feed of the latest news from my company. So they'll see, if we're going to have a scheduled server maintenance or something like that, relevant information to them, we put right on their dashboard. I don't have a screenshot. I'm sorry. I'll add a screenshot. Okay. File editors. So this is where it starts to get a little touch and go, a little controversial. Out of the box, WordPress has a couple of built-in file editors, and we've all used them at some point in our WordPress experience. We've certainly seen them used here by our friend Ben. Loves them. They're a very easy way to edit the site without actually opening an FTP client or opening get it directly connecting to the server. So you can edit right in line without any fanciness. The problem is that can introduce a lot of problems. Never mind. Basically, they're a security flaw to begin with. If somebody has access to your site, it's one click away from completely deleting your theme and deleting all the work that you've done. And not to mention that they're just sort of flawed to the structure of a site, because it's so easy to make a change in a file editor that sort of ruins everything, and have no idea of the history of that change because it doesn't save revisions. It's sort of just an easy place for things to fall apart. The client stumbles along there, thinks, oh, I can tweak a little bit of style here, that can just lead to a lot of complications. Now, that's not to say that you should restrict clients from being able to access their own files, because presumably they paid for them, and it's work for hire, and there's a lot of sort of ethical questions there. But it is to say that doing it within the WordPress site is not probably the best place to do it. So I recommend turning these off completely. It's 2 lines of code. I have this posted online. I'll show the link at the end. It's literally the easiest thing ever. 1 line, and you have no more file editors in WordPress. And it's just going to save a little bit of peace of mind knowing that things won't be so easily broken. TinyMCE. So this is a fun one for me. TinyMCE is the visual editor in WordPress. I've talked a little bit about this at this group before. So the visual editor, you think of as what you see is what you get. But out of the box, if you're not using one of WordPress's default themes, chances are it's not exactly what you see is what you get. The fonts are a little different, the colors might be a little bit different, your theme might have some features that don't show up exactly in the editor. So it's never exactly perfect. Fortunately, it's very easy to change. TinyMCE is actually an incredibly flexible editor. It makes it very easy to customize and tweak, so you actually have what you see is what you get on the front end versus the admin panel. There are a couple of ways you can go about accomplishing that. You can customize the buttons. So if you know, for example, you're working on a site that never uses, right align. For some reason, you know that this site is never going to need right align or justify align. You can remove those buttons. You can remove that second level of buttons. If you know any of the things on that kitchen sink you're not going to use, like maybe the symbol picker. I've never clicked the symbol picker. You can remove that. There's a little help option. I've never used it. Has anyone used it? No, you can just delete that. And the advantage to removing these buttons is really more of there's obviously the advantage that if you're not using a certain feature, and if you haven't built for a certain feature, hiding that is nice, because then you don't have to explain, well, you clicked this button and you didn't actually accommodate that style. Why didn't you accommodate that style? Because you shouldn't actually use it. And you can sort of prevent that conversation. But also, it just sort of streamlines things and makes it easier. I'll show you in a little bit. All of these changes I do for myself. So even on my own personal sites that I just build for my own personal enjoyment, I strip out buttons and I change those styles up just because I don't want to have to see other buttons that I know I'm never going to need to use. It just sort of simplifies the process, makes things a little bit cleaner and a little bit clearer. Custom styles. You can actually, like I said before, this idea of exactly what you see is exactly what you get. You could actually feed custom style sheet into TinyMCE. You can specify fonts in there, you can specify colors in there, so you can say, hey, TinyMCE, this is how my site looks. These are the colors I use on my site. These are the fonts I use on my site. I want you to actually show those in the visual editor. I think I have a picture of that. I do. So actually, this shows both of those things. This shows custom styles, as you can see. I have a dark background. I have light text. There's actually a text shadow there on all that text. And then I've also added some custom formats. You can see this pull quote here. All I have to do to get that is I just select a bit of text. I go up to the top to that styles box and select pull quote. Very easy, very useful, and you can specify those yourself. So again, it is pretty much exactly what you see is exactly what you get. Really, the only difference is that I have a shortcode here. That shortcode obviously gets translated out on the front end, in that case to be a Google Ad Unit. And then again at the top here, you can see I've stripped a bunch of buttons out. I know on this site I'm not going to need different alignment options. I don't know, I've stripped out a ton of stuff there. Those are the only buttons. There's no second row. I've completely hidden that second row, and it makes it easier to work with because those are the only options I know I'm ever going to need. And this is a site, again, like I said before, this is a personal site. I don't have anyone else working on this. This is something a personal project that I do for fun. I'm the type of person who could sit in the text mode in the HTML editor all the time. I'm comfortable with HTML. That wouldn't be a problem for me. But the WYSIWYG editor is so nice, and if I can make it, like in this case, reflect exactly what I get on the front end, there's really no reason not to. So accomplishing some of this, I do all of this in code. This is another situation where I love my code. But you can do most of this stuff with a plugin too. I recommend TinyMCE Advanced. This is done by Andrew Oz, who is a core developer. He actually handles all of WordPress's, or most of WordPress's TinyMCE integration. And he's also built this plugin that lets you get some of TinyMCE's more advanced features. It's drag and drop. You can put your own buttons into place and all sorts of stuff. And it comes with a nice feature for handling editor styles, where you actually don't have to pass a style sheet. It will add in custom styles for you based on certain CSS properties. It's very useful in that respect. Widgets. So I mentioned dashboard widgets before, right? And removing those, the ones you don't need. You can actually do the same thing with regular widgets, with drag and drop sidebar widgets. I do this all the time because, like I mentioned at WordCamp Toronto, WordPress comes with all these plugins for these widgets, out of the box. I feel like no one ever uses. Like there's a calendar. I've never seen a calendar on a live site, the calendar widget, in all my years of using WordPress. So rather than, I don't know about you guys, but for me, the widgets interface is a little frustrating because you have to kind of scroll around, and if you have a lot of sidebars, it's kind of tedious to move back and forth and find exactly the widget you're looking for and sort of sea of buttons that all look the same. So you can remove unneeded widgets. This is great, especially if you only have a certain number of widgets that you want accessible, or in a case where you're replacing a WordPress widget. For example, if you're building your own search widget to replace WordPress's widget with maybe like a Google search widget, custom AdSense search widget, you can actually remove the default search widget, have your own search widget in there, and then you don't have to explain, well, you want to make sure you get the search widget that says Google on it. You don't have to worry about that. You only have one in there, and you can sort of strip out and remove any confusion. Post and page browsing. I didn't really have a better way to describe it other than browsing. But when you click on all posts or all pages, you come to this page that lists, sort of in a table form, all of the different pages or posts or custom posts or whatever in your site. You can actually customize that table to show your own custom information or hide information too. Like I said here, customize those columns. Out of the box, I think on posts, you get categories column, you get a tags column, there's a date column, there's a title column, there's an author column. Well, if you're the only person on the site, you don't really need an author column. If you decided to use tags over categories, you don't really need a categories column. So why not remove those? And maybe you're working in a situation where you have a custom meta tag, a custom meta key that you have on every single page in your site for some reason. Maybe it's a specific number that gets associated with every page. Maybe you want to show that in its own column. Maybe you want to show your post thumbnails in a column. That's kind of useful. You can actually add in your own columns and pull in your own information very easily. I think I have a screenshot here. This just shows removing a couple columns. You can remove. I should remove the author column. I plan to do that. But you can see here I stripped out tags. I had an SEO plugin on this site, and I stripped out the SEO column because I didn't really need it. This is just a really easy way to sort of simplify things. Now, you probably know, hopefully know, that you can do that. You can strip out columns anyway with the Screen Options tab that would be sort of up in the top corner. That lets you go in and sort of check and display which columns you want, which columns you don't want. That's really useful, and I think it's important to show clients that because they can sort of set things up the way they want. And it's important to know that if you don't know that as a WordPress person. But removing columns at the code level means that the column's not even an option to turn on. If you just know, in this case, I'm not using tags, it's gone. There's never an option that it will show. And it means that those options stick across users because unchecking a box for yourself means it only applies for that user. It doesn't apply for every other user on your site. So this is sort of a way to do it that's universal, works for everyone, very easy. Inline documentation. This is new. WordCamp Toronto didn't see this. They heard a little bit about it, but they didn't see it in the slide. So, yay, Buffalo. So you simplified everything. You've gotten things really easy, and it's great, and everyone's happy. But you can probably do more in terms of making it, having information available directly for your clients, or even for yourself, having notes available on how to do certain things and how to do certain, how to use certain features in your site. I have two things here I want to show off. First is a knowledge base. You can build a knowledge base right into the back end of WordPress very easily. Here it is. There's a little tab over there, and now there are a bunch of different links there that will bring you to different information. Editing menu and options and homepage slider, and I can add more and remove those as I want. Really great way to just be able to, if you have a client who comes to you a lot and says, how do I do this thing? Just put it in a knowledge base on the back end of your site, and you don't have to worry about that ever again. This specific knowledge base is done with a plugin called WP Client Reference, which is really awesome. It's done by a guy named Steve Brenwell, who's also really awesome, and has a couple other plugins out that you should definitely check out. But I like this one a lot. You get the exact same editor. It's just a post editor, that we're all used to. You can add in your own stuff, and it also lets you style the knowledge base however you want. So you can actually specify your own style sheet, your own PHP file for the views, or you can use the one that comes without the box. That's just a really great way to provide that information up front for your clients, so they don't have to worry about, how do I do this? Well, go to the knowledge base, make sure that information is there. Another way to accomplish inline documentation, this is one I've been experimenting with a little bit lately, especially with plugins, but I think there's room for it in a more general use per site, is this funny little tab at the top. I don't think it gets used a lot, this little help tab, but it's actually super cool. You can pull that down, and then you have different tab options on the side. You can put your own content in there. This is a screenshot from our Total Slider plugin. We put in our internal documentation there. But that code you can pretty much apply anywhere within WordPress. Put in your own documentation, so you can just say, go to the Help tab. And the advantage to this is that it's pretty much, if you do it right, it can be relevant to context. So you have certain documentation that's only displayed on the post editor, and certain documentation that's only displayed on the dashboard, that sort of thing. Rather than a knowledge base, which is sort of a separate place you have to direct them to. Say, if you click the Help tab, we'll make sure there's information relevant to that task in there. And even if you don't do your own stuff, make sure to look over the included WordPress documentation in these help tabs, because you may want to keep what they have, and you may want to say to your clients, hey, there's good documentation up there. Or if what's up there deviates a lot from how you've set up the admin panel, you may want to remove it. It may just be more confusion than necessary. Let's see. The footer. So this is another cool one. So I didn't even really realize how much you can do with the admin footer. I knew what you could do with it, but sort of in a broader sense, how useful it can be. The admin footer, so I have a screenshot. So this little area, thank you for creating with WordPress, and then the version number. You can actually customize what this says over here, and you can put your own HTML in there. And the reason that that is useful, go back. For example, here, we put our logo there. So they can click there and go directly to our site. You could also put your phone number in there. Hey clients, you're having a problem, here's our phone number. Or it could be a link to a contact form. Or you could put in, if you're using Pingdom, which is a service that monitors website uptime, you could use their JavaScript API and just put in a little snippet of code there that shows that your site has 90% uptime this month. Just a little bit of information that's available on every page in just a nice compact way. A lot of people at WordCamp are really keen on the idea of putting contact information there, and I think that's something we're going to transition our little snippet into doing, and making sure that clients can easily access our stuff and our photos very quickly and very easily. I keep the freedoms and credits links there just because I think it's a nice thing to do. There's probably some legal questions about having to keep the freedoms link there, but definitely the credits is, there are a lot of cool people building WordPress, and I think even if you change that up, I think it's just a good idea to have that link anyway, just to be nice. So long story short, serving the client is more than building pretty websites. And I'm going to sort of say this again, it's not just about the client. Most of the examples that I show you, I do for my own personal websites, just because it makes it easier to work with. It makes it, it removes a lot of the clutter and a lot of the mess. And it makes WordPress a more specific experience to what I'm working on. But here, they need to be usable too. They need to be easy to interface with and easy to update content, easy to add content. In WordPress, like I mentioned before, this idea that with other systems you have to build the admin panel. The advantage to that is kind of you're building something specific to your needs. You're building something tailored to what you're doing and what your site's purpose is. Of course, the advantage to WordPress is that most of that work is done for you. And of course, that if you're working with a client or even for yourself, maybe the client, someone on their marketing team builds their personal site in WordPress, and they're familiar with it. And you as the WordPress developer hopefully have the WordPress experience. So there's the familiarity advantage there too. The advantage to doing it the other way, though, of course, is that you're getting something specific. Luckily, with a lot of these techniques, we can pare things down and get it to a point where it feels like they just built WordPress just for you, just for this project. And that's going to make it easier to deal with. It's going to make it more fun in a lot of ways, because you don't have to worry about things breaking, and it's just going to mean a more pleasant experience for everybody involved, whether they're your clients or it's just for your own fun on the weekend. You can make everybody happy. You can have happier designers because their stuff isn't getting messed around with. It's very focused, and the options are there to, things that are tested to work with their design. You can have happier clients because they don't have to worry, if I click the wrong button, is everything going to break? I have a lot of clients who are over 60 and over 70, and I have some clients who had never used a computer before until they got their first iPad. And so for them, every button that they come across could be the button that breaks everything. So changing and removing some of these options is going to make them happier because you can say safely, there is really no way you can break this thing. There's really no way that things can go wrong because I've padded things down and I've sort of ruined I fixed things so there's no way it can be ruined. This ultimately means a happier you, because when the people you work with are happier, you're happier. And particularly, if this is your own site, you're going to save yourself a lot of time over the long run because you don't have to muck around with a lot of options. Things just generally won't break, and you'll just generally be happier. So there it is. I have Chrome. Do we ever have Chrome?
Just type it in with the, just hit Command spacebar and then do it.
So if you're curious, or if not, I don't really care. cvp.me/WCTO. This will take you to the direct link that has the slides. Now I'm going to be posting tonight's version of the slides, probably even slightly modified from tonight. They're all up on SlideShare. The right font, whole darn thing.
I also posted this on WPBuffalo.com, so people can get it through there too.
Cool. So WPBuffalo.com if you're not following that internet. And then there's also a GitHub repo that has a lot of code options there for you to choose from and make your own. Not everything's up there yet. The menus aren't for doing custom menus. What else didn't I do? I didn't do browsing, so the customizing of the columns. I think that's it. I think everything else is up there. You don't have to know Git to understand these examples or get these examples. You can just click on this little button here. It will download a zip file to your computer, just like as if you were using regular WordPress. Or you can just browse them right on here. This is how to remove a bunch of the default widgets. This is how to add your own snippet to the footer. It's all here. It's all documented in line. And you can also submit your own. So I've actually gotten a couple pull requests. Somebody fixed a bug that I did. Somebody added their own to the dashboard, their own custom bit of code. And you can submit your own too if you are a curious party who has a cool thing. And the other thing is, if you go to manhattanmedia.com/blog and click on our top post here, I did a little post about WordCamp, but we're also turning this into an ebook. So you'll be able to get that ebook hopefully before Christmas. It's going to have the whole presentation sort of in written form, but also sort of expanded in some areas and tweaked a little bit, sort of focusing more on why anybody, not just clients, would do this, would customize the admin panel. It's also going to include a lot of code examples, more than just on the GitHub repo. And it's also going to include a couple of case studies. There are going to be 3 imaginary situations and how you might customize the WordPress admin panel in each of those 3 situations to sort of jog your brain and get some creativity going. So you can go on the blog here. We've got a little form there that goes to MailChimp, so you know it's good. And that's how you can get notified when we release that. Otherwise, just follow us on Twitter. It's in the sidebar here if you're so inclined, and we will release it. It's going to be like $2 or $3, and I think you'll get a PDF, EPUB, and Kindle format, and the whole works. So there we go. Thank you. It's just about 8 o'clock.